are the UK courts too willing to hand over British citizens to stand trial abroad? The case of Gary McKinnon, the man with Asperger's syndrome who's accused of hacking into US government computers, sparked a debate over whether the UK's extradition laws do enough to protect British citizens.
Well, an independent review earlier this year found the system was operating fairly. Last night, though, MPs overwhelmingly backed calls for a review into extradition treaties, arguing it's easier to extradite people from the UK than from the US.
The US authorities say Gary McKinnon was responsible for the biggest military computer hack of all time. Mr. McKinnon, who has Asperger's syndrome, claimed he was searching for evidence of little green men when he allegedly hacked into NASA and Pentagon computers from the bedroom of his North London flat. The US authorities have fought for the past 6 years to have him extradited to face trial in the US. His lawyers claim because of his condition, which is a form of autism, his health would not stand up to the ordeal. If convicted in the US, he could face 60 years in prison.
Because of their constitutional guarantee.
Last night, MPs highlighted his case in a Commons debate as they gave their overwhelming backing for a review of Britain's extradition laws.
Gary McKinnon should not be treated like some gangland mobster or Al-Qaeda mastermind.
The vote will undoubtedly help Gary McKinnon's fight, as the immigration minister said the MP's call will be given careful scrutiny by the government as it decides its response to an independent review of Britain's extradition laws. Keith Doyle, BBC News.
Well, let's talk now with Janis Sharp, Gary McKinnon's mother, and Jago Russell, who's the Chief Executive of Fair Trials International.
Hello.
A very good morning to you. Janis, first of all, tell us how Gary is at the moment.
Very bad condition, really. I mean, he sort of shuts himself away, sits in the dark. He's a good musician, but he can't play an instrument anymore, hasn't done for years, because of what it would bring up. And he's suffering from severe depression. I mean, it's 10 years, this will be his 10th Christmas since his arrest, and it's destroyed his life and it's destroyed ours. And here the CPS had said in 2002 that Gary was looking at 6 months community service, but then when the Americans took over, suddenly it becomes 60 years. I mean, there's a huge disparity.
And the district judge in the case said, unquestionably, if the defendant is to face prosecution, it should be in the United States, because they said, caused very considerable disruption to the workings of the computers, resulting in interference and disruption to military activities in the United States.
These are allegations. In the 2009 last court hearing, the CPS admitted they had been given no evidence whatsoever of the alleged damage. Without the damage, it wasn't extraditable. Professor Peter Summers, a top computer expert from the London School of Economics, said the financial damage of £400,000 that is alleged was basically to ensure that they had security in place, which they should have had in the first place. What Gary done was wrong, but he didn't do any deliberate damage.
So, Jago, you're Chief Executive of Fair Trials International. What makes you convinced, I don't know if you are, that Gary couldn't have a fair trial in America?
Well, there are some serious concerns in America about prison conditions, the use of solitary confinement, the length of sentences, 60 years for what is accused of doing.
So you don't like their system?
There are some serious problems with the US system, but I think the focus really here has to be on our extradition laws and making sure there are safeguards in British law to protect people here from being sent off to face trial in other countries where they could face trial here, but also where there are serious concerns about their treatment, about human rights concerns.
Now, this review, which was carried out in October by a retired judge, suggested that the current extradition laws were not unbalanced. MPs last night seemed to suggest there needed to be a change in extradition laws. So where will this go if a retired judge has looked at it and said no?
Well, there have been a number of inquiries and reviews now. In fact, one of the reviews that was being debated last night in Parliament was a review of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, and they said there were major problems with the way our extradition arrangements were working and called for all sorts of reforms.
What are the problems, in your view?
The problems, in my view, and the cases, we see many cases of extradition at Fair Trials International, a whole raft of problems. The basic issue is that it's become easier and easier to extradite people, and it's become a question of convenience and expediency, and the system seems to have forgotten the enormous human impact of extradition on people like Gary, and that kind of human aspect needs to be brought back into the debate.
Presumably in the same breath, Janis and Jago, I don't know how you feel, but you would presumably defend a nation's right to seek to extradite someone. And that's a very important principle, isn't it? That can't be ignored.
Absolutely, but I defend our right to equality to Americans. If we want to extradite an American, we have to provide actual evidence in their court, which they can contest in a court. They don't have to provide, under this new treaty, a scrap of evidence, which the CPS admitted they don't have, and we have never had an opportunity to contest that evidence. Now, surely we have to have equality to our partner, and not to have is wrong. And to say that it's equal is not the case, because we have to provide actual evidence which can be contested in an American court before any extradition can take place. And only one American has been extradited to here. 28 British people have gone the other way, and they have 5 times the population of us. So it's been used a little bit too frivolously, I think.
Janis, you were saying right at the beginning of the interview how Gary was, and you were saying he effectively locking himself in.
Closed off, totally.
And worried about the knock on the door.
Yep.
But knows that he did something wrong.
Oh, yeah. Well, our argument is to try Gary here, and to be given a proportional sentence. I mean, to go from 6 months to 60 years is ludicrous. And Gary was accused of this prior to the extradition treaty even being signed or even being written. So it was 2002, so he should have been tried here.
So it would have been better had the Crown Prosecution Service gone ahead with the trial, in your view, so that he could have completed whatever sentence they imposed if they proved it.
There was a young man called Aaron Caffrey who was accused of the biggest hack of all time at the same time as Gary, of bringing down the ships in Port Houston in Britain. He was tried in Southwark Crown Court. And he also has Asperger's syndrome. He also had UF photographs all over his wall. Why was he tried here and Gary wasn't?
Can I ask Jago, last thought? I mean, Gary's case has attracted a lot of publicity now, of course. There are other cases, similar cases pending? I mean, how widespread?
There are a huge number of extradition cases now. As I say, it become easier and easier to extradite people. So last year alone, just within the European Union, there were 1,000 extraditions from the UK to other European countries. And we've seen a number of cases where people's extradition have been ordered, even though they weren't in the place where the crime took, when the crime happened. A guy that we looked after the last year who had 3 young kids, whose extradition to Italy was ordered for a murder he couldn't possibly have committed. The British courts had no power, they said, to stop his extradition. A system like that just cannot be right. It can't be right for the courts to be involved in this process, but for them to have their hands tied so they can't stop injustice.
OK, Jago, Janis, thank you both very much for your time this morning.